If you have ever driven Interstate 15 between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, you have passed a green exit sign that does not make sense. It reads ZZX ROAD. 5 letters, 3 of them are the letter Z. It sits in open Mojave Desert about 7 miles south of Baker, California. You slow down, you try to say it out loud, you keep driving. 4.5 miles down that road, there are palm trees. There are pools of water and a cluster of concrete buildings on the edge of a dry, salt lake, in a place where nothing should grow. It looks like an oasis. It looks like a hospital. It looks like a church. It was built by a man who was not a doctor, on land he did not own, around hot springs that were not hot. He kept it for 30 years, and there was one thing he wanted out of all of it, one small thing that he never got. We will come back to that at the end. His name was Curtis Howe Springer. He was born in Birmingham, Alabama on the 2nd of December, 1896, and that is close to the last fact about him that anyone can verify. He said he held a medical degree, a doctorate, and a degree in naturopathy. Some of them, he said, from the Springer School of Humanism, others from something called the National Academy. Neither school ever existed. There is no record of the degrees and no record of most of the rest of it. The man who would spend 3 decades selling cures for cancer had no medical training of any kind that anyone has ever found. He was a fabrication long before ZZYZX was. What he was genuinely good at was talking. Through the 1930s, he built a radio ministry out of Chicago and then Pittsburgh, mixing hymns and scripture with warnings against alcohol, and selling homemade tonics between the sermons. Here's the detail most people get wrong about this story. The American Medical Association did not catch on to him at the end. In 1935, the Journal of the American Medical Association ran an investigation into him titled "A Quack and His Nostrums." They printed him again the following year in a report on medical fraud. The nation's doctors had his number 34 years before the label everyone remembers. It did not slow him down at all. What he needed was somewhere the complaints could not easily follow. He found it in a used bookstore. By his own account, he paid 25 cents for a book about mineral springs of the Pacific Coast and read about a spot in the Mojave called Soda Springs. Year-round water, 200 miles east of Los Angeles, 11 miles from the nearest town. Water, sun, and almost no witnesses. On the 13th of September 1944, he filed mining claims on 12,800 acres of it, a tract roughly 8 miles long and 3 miles wide, staked under an old law from 1872 that let a citizen claim public land in order to mine it. He had no intention of mining anything, and more or less said so for the rest of his life. The claim was not a mine. It was a key. It put him on federal land and kept the government at arm's length while he built something the law had never imagined. He named it ZZYZX for one reason. He wanted it to be the last word, the final entry in every phone book, every directory, every dictionary in America, alphabetically last forever. Then he started building and he found his labor in the cheapest place available. He drove into Los Angeles and recruited homeless men off Skid Row. Room, board, a bed in the desert, and work. They mixed the concrete and poured the foundations for a 2-story hotel he called the Castle. Rows of cottages, a chapel, a library, a radio studio, and a private airstrip he named the Zairport. He laid out a main street and called it the Boulevard of Dreams. At the center of it were cross-shaped pools of warm mineral water, the beating heart of a health resort built on the promise of natural hot springs. The springs were not hot. Soda Springs is a cold spring. The Mojave has genuine hot springs, and this is not one of them. So Springer buried a diesel boiler on the property and heated the pools himself. Sit with that for a second, because it is the whole operation in miniature. The warmth that sick people lowered themselves into, believing it rose out of the healing earth, came from a machine hidden in the sand. We want to stop here because a lot of people hear this story and quietly decide he was onto something. That the doctors went after him because he worked. It is a reasonable instinct, and we understand it. Real medicine in those years was harsh and expensive and far away, especially if you were poor or rural or frightened, and a warm voice on the radio was free. But the boiler is the answer. If the water had power, he did not need a machine to fake the one property that was supposed to prove it. He faked the evidence for his own product. That is not a healer being persecuted. That is a man who knew. What made him rich was not the guests, it was the mail. At its peak, his program went out over 221 stations in the United States and another 102 abroad. Send a donation to the ministry and a cure came back. The National Park Service estimates he shipped more than 4 million packages. Inside them was bark and herbs sold as a life-extending tea, which was a laxative, a baldness cure that appears to have been mostly salt and desert mud, an antacid that testing found to be largely baking soda. He claimed 27 different miracle cures in all. For 23 years, it simply worked. He squatted on public land and built a hotel, a church, a radio empire, and an airstrip on it, and nobody with the authority to stop him came down the road. A lie told far enough from anyone who can check it can stand for a generation. Then he crossed the line that finished him. By the late 1960s, he began carving the land into lots and letting his biggest donors build homes on them. He was selling pieces of public land as if they were his. In July of 1967, the Bureau of Land Management sued him for $34,187 in damages and back rent. On the 11th of April 1974, a federal judge ruled his mining claims gave him no right to occupy or develop any of it. The eviction was not a letter. It was a convoy of federal marshals driving 4.5 miles across the salt flat, raising a line of dust that everyone at ZZYZX could watch approaching for a long time before it arrived. He was 77. They gave him 36 hours. He offered, one last time, to just pay the $34,000. The government refused to take it because taking the money would have meant admitting he had ever had a right to be there. Subscribe to Comeback Atlas if you want more of these. The people who lost most were not Springer. He walked away wealthy. It was the donors. Their homes stood on land that had never been his to give, and the government ordered the unauthorized buildings destroyed. People who had sent a radio preacher their savings and then poured a foundation in the desert watched it become worthless in one court order. There was no restitution and nobody left to sue. Springer died in Las Vegas in 1985, insisting to the end that he had been robbed. And then the desert did something nobody planned. In 1976, the government handed the site to a group of California State University campuses, and the fake resort became a real research station. It is the Desert Study Center today. His hotel rooms are their bunks, his buildings are their laboratories. The artificial pond he dug and gave an invented native name is now one of the last refuges on Earth for an endangered fish called the Mojave tui chub. It has died out almost everywhere else. The one genuinely healing thing, at ZZX is a life he never meant to save, which leaves the thing he wanted. He built that name, those two front Z's, the whole strange word, so that ZZX would be the last entry in the American dictionary, his name outliving every other word in the language. It was never added. The man who spent his life determined to have the last word died without it. Next time that sign comes up in your headlights, you will know what is at the end of the road. Tell us in the comments if you ever took that exit. Subscribe to Comeback Atlas.